There is a quiet kind of person who moves through this world without announcing themselves. They don't post their face. They don't share their victories. They don't document their meals, their travels, their grief, or their joy for an audience of strangers. And the moment most people notice this, they ask the same question, almost reflexively: what are they hiding? What is wrong with them? Why would someone so capable, so interesting, so full of depth, choose to remain invisible in a world that rewards visibility above almost everything else? That question sounds like curiosity, but it isn't. It is judgment dressed up as concern. And what makes it so revealing is that the people asking it almost never stop to consider that the premise itself might be broken. That visibility and worth might not be the same thing at all. That the person who is not performing themselves publicly might not be afraid of the world. They might simply have understood something about it that most people haven't yet. This is where we need to start. Not with empaths, not with social media psychology, not with research or frameworks. We need to start with the assumption itself, because the assumption is the problem. Modern culture has quietly built an entire belief system around visibility. It happened gradually, incrementally, and most people never noticed it happening. Somewhere between the rise of social platforms and the birth of the influencer economy, two things got fused together that were never meant to be the same thing: presence and worth. The more you are seen, the logic goes, the more you matter. The more people engage with your image, your voice, your face, the more significant your existence must be. And if you resist that system, if you opt out, if you choose silence over performance, you must be operating from fear. You must lack the confidence to be seen. Something must be missing. But here is what that assumption actually reveals. It reveals that the people making it have already accepted a transaction. They have agreed, consciously or not, to let public reaction define private value. They have handed over the internal measuring stick and replaced it with an external one: likes, comments, follower counts, view totals. These are not just numbers to them. They are emotional feedback. They are proof that they exist in a way that matters. And because they have accepted that transaction so completely, they genuinely cannot understand why someone would refuse it. They look at the person who doesn't post and they see absence where there is actually fullness. They see insecurity where there is actually rootedness. They see withdrawal where there is actually sovereignty. Empaths tend to be among the first people to see through this, not because they are smarter, not because they are morally superior, but because they experience the world at a different frequency. Empaths are unusually perceptive of emotional undercurrents. They don't just see what is happening on the surface of a social exchange. They feel what is underneath it. And when an empath looks at someone posting their face, their body, their life on social media, and watching the responses flood in, they don't just see a person sharing content. They see the invisible architecture behind it. The need, the hunger, the quiet bargaining that says, please see me, please tell me I matter, please give me evidence that I am enough. That transaction is so transparent to a deeply perceptive person that it becomes almost painful to witness, not because they judge it, but because they recognize it, because they have felt that hunger themselves, and many of them have made a quiet, private decision that they are no longer willing to feed it. That decision is not obvious. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a declaration or a statement or a philosophical manifesto. It comes quietly, usually after years of trying the other way, after years of measuring their worth against reaction, after years of posting and waiting and hoping and adjusting. And then, slowly, the realization settles in. The cycle never ends. Every validation creates the need for the next one. Every post that performs well raises the standard for the next one. Every period of silence creates anxiety. And the person at the center of it all, the person whose face and name and life are being consumed, starts to wonder when they stopped being a person and started being content. That moment of recognition is where many empaths begin to quietly exit the performance. What they discover on the other side of that exit is something they were not expecting. They discover that worth does not actually require witnesses, that identity does not collapse without an audience. That peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't fluctuate based on who noticed you today, is actually available. It has always been available. It was just buried under the noise of constant performance. And the moment that becomes clear, the calculus changes entirely. Because if worth is not dependent on visibility, then visibility is just one option among many. Not the measure of a life, not the proof of a self, just one possible mode of being in the world, and not the one that costs the least or gives the most. This is a deeply threatening realization to a culture built on performance. Because if worth doesn't require witnesses, then the entire infrastructure of social media validation loses its power. The metrics lose their meaning. The engagement statistics lose their emotional weight. And the people who have organized their self-perception around those metrics suddenly find themselves standing on ground that is less stable than they thought. This is why empaths who go quiet are so often met with discomfort, with dismissal, with the assumption that something must be wrong. Because their silence is not really silence. It is a living argument. It is a constant embodied demonstration that the performance isn't necessary, and that demonstration is profoundly unsettling to people who have accepted the performance as inevitable. There is something else happening beneath this that most analysis misses entirely. Many empaths do not just lack interest in performance. They have a positive, active relationship with privacy that goes much deeper than simply choosing not to post. They treat privacy as a form of nourishment. They understand, often without being able to fully articulate it, that some things deepen when they are not exposed. Some truths become more solid in stillness. Some parts of the self grow stronger precisely because they are never asked to perform for an audience. Think about what silence does to a piece of music. Think about what negative space does to a painting. The absence of sound, the absence of visual information, is not nothing. It is doing something. It is shaping the experience just as powerfully as what is present. Empaths often relate to their own inner life this way. They understand that not everything needs to be filled in. Not every moment needs to be witnessed. And some of the most valuable things they carry inside them have value precisely because they have never been handed over to public consumption. There is a concept that most people in modern culture have almost completely lost access to, and that is the concept of the sacred. Not sacred in a religious sense necessarily, though it can be that too. Sacred in the sense of something precious enough to protect from casual handling. Something that loses its quality, its meaning, its power, the moment it becomes commonly accessible. The empath who does not post their photos is often, at the core, someone who has retained a felt sense of the sacred, who understands that some things do not belong in public, who would rather have 5 people in their life who truly know them than 500,000 people who recognize their face, and who has made the psychological judgment that exposure without discernment is not connection, it is dilution. This is a radical position in the current cultural moment. We live inside a system that has trained people to believe that more sharing is always better, that transparency is always virtuous, that the only thing standing between a person and genuine connection is their willingness to be seen. And there is a small kernel of truth in that, which is what makes the larger distortion so effective. It is true that hiding from vulnerability leads to isolation. It is true that genuine intimacy requires genuine self-disclosure. But what that truth gets used to justify is something completely different. It gets used to justify total visibility, constant availability, chronic self-exposure to audiences who have no investment in you, no history with you, no responsibility toward you, and no capacity to truly receive you. And that is not connection. That is performance of connection, which is something else entirely. Empaths tend to feel the difference between those two things very sharply. They can tell, often instantly, when a social interaction is genuine and when it is performed. When someone is truly curious about them and when someone is merely collecting them. When a relationship has real emotional substance and when it is just two people exchanging carefully managed images of themselves. And once you can feel that difference clearly, the appeal of mass visibility diminishes dramatically. Because what is the point of being seen by millions of people in a way that is fundamentally false? What is the point of having your image consumed by strangers who are responding not to you, but to a curated representation of you? The empath who asks these questions quietly, over time, usually arrives at the same conclusion. Real connection does not scale. Genuine intimacy has a size limit. And if the choice is between being truly known by a small number of people or superficially recognized by a large number of people, the empath will almost always choose depth over reach. Now here is where privacy becomes protection, and this is the layer that most conversations about empaths and social media never reach. Because there is a difference between an empath who has always been private and an empath who became private. The second type is far more common, and what they carry with them is not just a philosophical preference for depth over visibility. They carry experience. Specifically, they carry the experience of what happens when you are too open with the wrong people and what that costs. Many empaths begin their lives as extraordinarily open people. They share freely. They trust easily. They give emotional access without demanding credentials. They assume, because of the depth of their own empathy, that other people are operating with similar goodwill. And for a long time, sometimes for decades, this openness feels like a virtue. It feels like the truest expression of who they are. And then reality begins to teach them otherwise, not through a single dramatic betrayal, but through accumulation. Through the person who took their openness as an invitation to project. Through the relationship where their transparency became someone else's leverage. Through the experience of sharing something genuine and watching it get mishandled, misrepresented, gossiped about, or weaponized. Through discovering that not everyone who wants access to you wants it for reasons that serve you. Each of these experiences lands differently in an empath than it would in someone less sensitive. Because empaths do not just register betrayal intellectually. They feel it in layers. They process it deeply, sometimes obsessively. They understand it from multiple angles simultaneously, including from the perspective of the person who hurt them, which makes the pain more complex rather than simpler. And what comes out of that processing over time is not bitterness, it is education. A deeply felt, deeply embodied understanding that openness without discernment is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability. And that vulnerability has a cost. The shift that happens after this education is profound. The empath does not stop being open. They stop being indiscriminately open. They develop standards, not rules imposed from the outside, but genuine internal criteria that determine who receives access to which parts of them. And this is where their behavior changes in ways that the outside world often misreads. They share less publicly. They keep more experiences private. They stop explaining themselves to people who have demonstrated they are committed to misunderstanding them. They stop offering emotional transparency in contexts where it has previously been exploited. And yes, sometimes they stop posting photos of themselves online because they have learned, through experience rather than theory, that casual visibility can invite unwanted energy, unwanted interpretation, and unwanted entanglement. What looks like retreat is often, from the inside, the first time in years they feel genuinely safe. What looks like distance is discernment. What looks like withdrawal is the empath finally understanding that not everyone who wants access to them deserves it and acting accordingly. This is one of the most significant markers of emotional maturity in a highly sensitive person. The movement from indiscriminate openness to intelligent selectivity. The ability to say, this part of me is sacred, and I will decide who receives it. That is not a wall. That is a gate. Walls prevent everything. Gates make choices. The distinction matters because so many empaths have been told by partners, by family members, by therapists, by the culture at large, that their guardedness is a problem to be solved, that their privacy is evidence of damage, that the healed version of themselves would be more open, more visible, more sharing. And some of them have believed that. Some of them have pushed against their own instincts in the direction of more exposure, and every single time they have done it on command, rather than from genuine desire, it has cost them something. Their peace, their sense of self, their ability to trust their own perceptions. Because the message that guardedness equals damage is itself a form of manipulation. It is a way of making the sensitive person doubt the very instinct that is actually protecting them. Healthy boundaries are not the absence of healing, they are evidence of it. The empath who has done real psychological work does not become endlessly accessible. They become selectively accessible. They stop performing openness for people who misuse it. They stop treating their vulnerability as something they owe to anyone who asks for it. They begin to understand that genuine emotional transparency offered to genuinely safe people is one of the most beautiful things a human being can do. And that the same transparency offered to unsafe people is not virtue. It is self-abandonment. The difference is discernment. And discernment takes time, experience, and a willingness to learn from pain rather than be defined by it. There is another dimension of this that is rarely discussed, and it has to do with the relationship between attention and energy. Empaths often report something that is difficult to explain to people who don't share their sensitivity. The experience of being observed, being assessed, being perceived by a large number of strangers simultaneously carries a felt weight that goes beyond the psychological. It is not exactly exhausting in the physical sense, but it is depleting in a way that is hard to articulate. When an empath's image is out in the world, being seen and interpreted by hundreds or thousands of people at once, many of them report a strange awareness of it, a sense of being energetically spread thin, of pieces of themselves existing in contexts they cannot monitor or control, of being partially inside the perceptions of strangers who are projecting their own needs, fears, desires, and judgments onto the image. Whether you interpret this through a psychological lens or an energetic one, the pattern is consistent enough to be worth taking seriously. Highly sensitive people process social stimuli more deeply than most. They are more aware of being observed. They experience judgment more intensely. They feel the weight of others' perceptions in a way that most people simply do not register. So what looks from the outside like an aversion to attention is often, from the inside, a rational response to a very real form of sensory and emotional load. The empath who does not put their image out into the world is not avoiding the world. They are managing their relationship with it in a way that preserves their capacity to function fully within it. This connects to a broader truth about empaths and the concept of energy management. Because empaths, at a basic functional level, must be more deliberate about where their attention goes than most people do. Attention for a highly sensitive person is not a neutral resource. It is weighted. Where it flows, it carries everything, the full depth of feeling, the complete range of perception, the heightened awareness of every nuance and undercurrent. This means that when an empath is fully present with another person, that presence has a quality and an intensity that most people rarely experience in ordinary social interaction. But it also means that presence is expensive. It cannot be given to everyone. It cannot be scattered across the entire internet without consequence. And the empath who has learned this about themselves makes choices accordingly. They become deliberate. They protect their attention the way other people protect their money, because they have learned through direct experience what it costs to spend it carelessly. There is a particular kind of freedom that emerges from this understanding, and it is worth dwelling on because it is genuinely rare and genuinely powerful. Most people, if they are honest, spend a significant portion of their mental energy managing the impressions they make on others. They are constantly running a background process that monitors how they appear, adjusts their behavior based on perceived judgment, and calibrates their self-presentation in response to social feedback. This process is so automatic, so deeply embedded, that most people don't even notice they are doing it. It feels like normal thinking. It feels like social awareness. But what it actually is, when you examine it carefully, is a form of chronic, low-grade anxiety about approval. And it uses enormous amounts of cognitive and emotional bandwidth that could otherwise be available for actual living. The empath who has genuinely stepped outside the need for external validation has freed up that bandwidth. They are not running that background monitoring process, at least not for strangers. They are not asking, how am I coming across? What does my image project? How are people interpreting me? They have unsubscribed from that feedback loop. And what fills the space that loop used to occupy is something remarkable. Presence. Genuine, undivided, full-quality attention to actual experience. The conversation they are having right now, the way light looks this morning, the feeling of their own thoughts moving through their mind without the constant interruption of imagined judgment. This is not a small thing. This is the difference between a life that is constantly performed and a life that is actually inhabited. And empaths who have crossed into that experience know, often without being able to explain it, that they are not willing to go back. The philosophical dimension of this is worth exploring directly, because it goes deeper than psychology. There is a question that most people in the modern world never stop long enough to genuinely ask, not just as a rhetorical exercise, but as a real, personal, urgent question. What is a moment, actually? What makes an experience meaningful? Is meaning generated by the experience itself, or by the fact that it was witnessed and acknowledged? If you live something beautiful and no one knows it happened, did it happen less? If you feel something profound and never share it, is it somehow less real? These are not trivial questions. The answers to them determine how a person structures their entire life. And the dominant cultural answer right now, the one embedded in the design of every social platform and amplified by every algorithm, is that meaning is generated by witness, that the undocumented moment is somehow incomplete, that the unshared joy is diminished by its privacy. Empaths, almost universally, reject this, not because they have read a philosophy book about it, but because their direct experience tells them otherwise. They have had moments of profound beauty, of deep inner peace, of genuine joy that no one else witnessed. That existed entirely within the space of their own perception. And those moments have not felt diminished by their privacy. They have often felt more complete by it, more whole, more theirs, because they were not divided between experiencing and presenting. They were simply there, fully entirely, without the interrupting question of how this will look. And the quality of that experience, the depth and completeness of it, is something no documented moment has ever matched for them. Once you have felt the difference between experiencing life and performing life, the desire to perform it diminishes very rapidly. This is the philosophical heart of the empath's relationship with visibility. They are not afraid of the world. They are not hiding from it. They are not waiting to become confident enough to show themselves. They have found something in privacy that performance cannot provide. They have found the unmediated experience of their own existence, the felt reality of a moment that belongs entirely to them, not to an audience, not to a platform, not to the collective judgment of people who do not know them. And they have decided clearly and without apology that this is more valuable to them than any amount of recognition. This is not a consolation. It is not what people tell themselves when they lack confidence. It is an active preference that requires courage to maintain in a world that constantly pressures you to perform. Because the pressure is real and it is constant. It does not come only from strangers. It comes from people they love. It comes from family members who wonder why they are so private. From friends who feel excluded when they don't share. From partners who interpret restraint as emotional distance. From a culture that has so thoroughly normalized performance that the absence of it reads as pathology. The empath navigating all of this must develop a kind of inner stability that most people never need to build. They must be able to hold their own sense of reality firmly in the face of persistent social pressure to abandon it. They must be able to say clearly, in their own mind, if not always out loud, I know who I am and I do not need the world to confirm it. That is not arrogance. That is one of the rarest and most beautiful forms of psychological health that exists. And here is the thing that the culture gets most fundamentally wrong about people like this. It looks at their silence and sees something missing. But what is actually there in the space that performance used to occupy is not emptiness. It is substance. Empaths who have chosen privacy over performance often have inner lives of extraordinary richness. They think deeply. They feel fully. They engage with ideas, relationships, beauty, and experience with a completeness that people who are constantly performing for an audience rarely access. They are not less. They are more. They are so much more than what is visible that visibility itself has started to feel like a reduction, like trying to capture an ocean in a photograph. The image might be beautiful, but it is not the thing itself. And the empath knows this. They have always known it. The photo is not the sunset. The post is not the feeling. The follower count is not the relationship. And they are no longer willing to pretend otherwise. There is a particular kind of person that the quiet empath tends to attract once they have moved into the space of genuine self-possession. Not the person who wants to consume them. Not the person who is drawn by image or status or the performance of a curated life. The person who shows up for the quiet empath is almost always someone who is also looking for something real. Someone who is tired of the performance. Someone who is hungry for a conversation that goes somewhere instead of just circling the surface. Someone who has felt the hollowness of constant visibility and is quietly, privately looking for a different way. And when two people like this find each other, the quality of connection that becomes possible is something most people living on the surface of social performance never experience, because it is built not on impression management, but on genuine recognition. The kind of knowing that only happens between people who have both chosen depth over display. This is the final truth about the empath who does not post their photos, the one that is hardest to explain and hardest to understand from the outside. It is not a limitation. It is not a wound. It is not a fear waiting to be conquered. It is a set of values so deeply held and so clearly felt that they have reorganized an entire life around them. The value of genuine experience over documented experience. The value of selective depth over broad visibility. The value of the sacred over the performed. The value of inner peace over external recognition. The value of being truly known by a few over being superficially recognized by many. These are not consolations. These are choices. Active, ongoing, deliberate choices made by people who have looked clearly at what the alternative costs and decided it costs too much. And maybe the real question is not why empaths choose to be unseen. Maybe the real question is why so many other people are so deeply afraid of the same choice. Why the decision to stop performing generates so much discomfort in those who haven't made it. Why the quiet person, the one who does not need your validation, the one who is not competing for your attention, is somehow more threatening than the one who is loudly seeking both. The answer, when you sit with it long enough, is that genuine self-possession in another person is a mirror. It shows you what you have handed over and to whom. It shows you the performance you have accepted as normal. It shows you the gap between the person you are presenting to the world and the person you actually are in the moments no one is watching. That gap is uncomfortable. And the person who has closed that gap, who has made peace between the private self and the public one by choosing the private one as the foundation, is living evidence that the gap does not have to exist. That is not a small thing. That is, in the current cultural moment, possibly the most radical act of self-possession available. To live in a way that does not require the world's confirmation. To know your own value without posting it, proving it, performing it, or seeking evidence of it in the reactions of strangers. To have closed that gap, not by becoming more public, but by becoming more inward, more rooted, more completely and quietly yourself. That is what the empath who does not post their photos often knows, in a way that has moved past thought into something more like bone-deep certainty. Not because someone told them, not because they read it somewhere, but because they live toward it slowly through experience and pain and the gradual shedding of everything that was never really theirs to begin with. All the external validation, all the performed identities, all the curated images and carefully managed impressions, gone. And what remains underneath, what was always underneath, is something that doesn't need a caption, doesn't need an audience, and doesn't need a single person in the world to see it in order to be completely and entirely real. And that is not hiding. That is the most honest way of being alive that most people will never find the courage to try.